year 9, half term 4, you're going to be learning about cold environment. So what is a cold environment? A cold environment is an area that is at or below 0 degrees for a long period of time. So not just somewhere that sometimes experiences cold temperatures, but at or below 0 for long periods of time. Generally, we find cold environments in the extreme south and extreme north of the planet, near the pole. So the North Pole and the Arctic Circle, the South Pole and the Antarctic Circle. The first type of cold environment is more extreme. It's a polar environment. In a polar environment, it gets really cold, extremely cold, anywhere down to minus 50 degrees Celsius in the winter. And also, despite all the snow you can see, very little precipitation. It just sticks around longer and freezes because of the extremely low temperatures. An example of an animal that you would find there that is adapted to the area is a polar bear. How is it adapted? Well, it's got thick white fur to cope with those minus 50 degree temperatures, as well as a black nose, black eyes to absorb sunlight to keep it warm. The other example, which is less extreme, is the tundra environment, where in the winter it might get down to minus 20 or 30 degrees, but in the summer you get some thawing of the ice or melting of the ice, and it would become above 0, so about 10 degrees Celsius. An example of a plant that is adapted to these cold environments is the Arctic bearberry. You can see that it has these really attractive red berries, those ensure that birds come along, eat the seeds and then fly off and poo out the seeds elsewhere, so that the original bearberry plant, or the parent plant, and its offspring aren't competing for nutrients in the permafrost, which is permanently frozen soil. As it's permanently frozen, it's not very fertile, so the two plants don't want to be competing for the nutrients. An example of an animal that is adapted to the tundra is an Arctic fox. Again, white fur for camouflage from prey, but also thick fur to protect from those minus 50 degrees Celsius temperatures, just like a polar bear. Our example of a cold environment are the islands of Svalbard. So they are a Norwegian territory, so they are run and owned by the country of Norway, which is just here. And they are the northernmost islands, inhabited islands in the world. So nobody lives further north than the people in Svalbard. Generally, about 60% of Svalbard is covered in a polar biome, or covered in ice caps, and about 40% is tundra biome. The biggest city in Svalbard and the capital of Svalbard is a city called Longyearbyen, and about 2,700 people live there, and everybody that lives in Svalbard lives in Longyearbyen. So the population of Longyearbyen is 2,700, but the population of Svalbard is also 2,700. And in Longyearbyen and in Svalbard in general, there are lots of economic opportunities. One of those is mining or mineral extraction, particularly for coal. So in the mountains, in the hills around Longyearbyen, there are lots of coal deposits, and that brings up to 300 jobs for people in Svalbard. Also lots of opportunity for fishing in the Barents Sea, which is a cold sea that surrounds Svalbard. Lots of tuna, cod, and a Norwegian favourite, herring, in the Barents Sea. Also tourism. So in 2017, 10,000 tourists visited Svalbard, possibly to see the polar bear, but the thing that attracts the most tourists is the northern lights, which are particularly visible in winter in Svalbard. However, there are also economic challenges, and most of those relate to the extreme environment. So the extreme cold and extreme temperatures mean that frostbite and hypothermia are really easy to get if you're not dressed appropriately. So people end up wearing lots of layers of clothing. Why is that an economic challenge? Because it makes jobs like construction really difficult to do. We've also got the polar night. So for 6 months, or about 6 months of the year, Svalbard is in complete darkness, and for the other 6 months of the year, it is in complete daylight. So those 6 months of dark make construction quite difficult. There is also issues with services. You can see some gas pipes that have been installed here, or I think they might be water pipes actually, but water pipes, but they've been installed above the ground. The reason they're above the ground is to prevent them from melting the permafrost, as water and gas pipes need to be heated in order to stop them from freezing. but also in case the permafrost was to melt due to the impact of climate change, for example, so that they don't break and leak into the pristine wilderness. There are also issues with accessibility. So Svalbard only has one airport, and as you can see, it's quite small, but they also only have 50 kilometers of road. So most people have to use snowmobiles to get around, and there are more snowmobiles in Svalbard than there are people. So why are cold environments like Svalbard under threat, and why do they need protecting? The first thing is that all cold environments are incredibly delicate. So a small amount of damage, environmental damage, can lead to long-lasting effects that can take at least 10 years to recover. An example of an area that is particularly delicate, so the autumn tundra landscape in northern Canada, is an example of pristine wilderness that is incredibly fragile. So when we think about protecting cold environments, it's all about weighing up the economic opportunities with the environmental challenges, and thinking about, does the argument for economic development outweigh the argument for conservation? One place where they've had to think about this is in Alaska, in the northwestern part of the United States, where off-road tourism, so kind of driving around in 4x4s and jeeps on safaris, have meant that extreme damage to the wilderness can be seen. Keep saying wilderness, it's wilderness, but can be seen. So you can see these tracks here from tourist cars, but also from pipelines and oil. This is in Siberia, but they also have that problem in Alaska and other cold environments, leading to pollution of the environment around the pipelines. If you want to look in detail at the environmental damage an oil spill can cause, pause the video and have a look at those now. So why are cold environments important and in need of protecting? Well, the first is that some people live there. There are indigenous people, such as in Nunavut in Canada, where the Inuit live, that have lived there for thousands of years. So it is important that their way of life and their rights are respected. Also scientific research. So the British Antarctic Survey in Antarctica conduct research on this pristine wilderness so we can learn more about our planet. It's also really important for research into climate change, like drilling ice cores for evidence. Also, in terms of tourism, so tourism is really important to bring the people, Svalbard and also cold environments, economic income and to help them economically develop. And then finally, the animals, or the biodiversity. Now, tundra environments, particularly in the Arctic Circle in the North Pole, are way more biodiverse than they should be based on the environment, and we have a lot of highly adapted species living there. So it's important to protect cold environments to protect that biodiversity. Part of that biodiversity are also the unique species of plants that you would find there. If you want to see some more reasons why we should protect cold environments, pause the video here. Finally, how can we manage cold environments? So again, it's about weighing up the economic opportunities with the environmental challenges. 3 ways that we can manage them. We can use technology to get around the problem of environmental damage. We can ask governments or get governments to take action, or we can use the work of conservation groups. So how do we use technology? This is the Trans-Alaskan pipeline, which carries oil from where it is extracted at Prudhoe Bay in the north of Alaska to the south of Alaska in a port called Valdez, which is a hot port that doesn't melt, so that doesn't freeze in the winter, so that we can transport the oil. As you can see, the pipeline is raised like those surfaces in Svalbard to prevent it from melting the permafrost, or prevent melting permafrost from causing damage and oil spills. It's also built on stilts, which mean that migrating caribou can migrate underneath the pipeline, and it's also earthquake proof, so the pipeline can move in the event of seismic activity to ensure that it doesn't break under earthquakes. As you can see, caribou migrate and also live around the pipeline, and it's sufficiently high enough for them to pass underneath without any disturbance. The next thing is action by government. So for example, the Antarctica Treaty, ratified by lots of countries that you can see here, essentially aims to protect Antarctica as a pristine wilderness. So things like no military use, making it a nuclear-free zone, and all stations open to inspection by other nations ensure that that can be conserved through international agreement. And finally, conservation groups. So groups like the WWF, the World worldwide fund for nature, work with indigenous people in cold environments like we mentioned before to protect species like polar bears. So one example is the use of fireworks to scare polar bears away when they come into contact with humans to prevent people from having to shoot them. Other species that the WWF protect marine species, so we've got the narwhal, which are an endangered species very close to unfortunately becoming extinct. We wouldn't want that to happen, because then the only place we'd see them is in the opening scenes of the movie Elf. So, 3 homework tasks that you could do. So, you can either create an advert that advocates for protecting cold environments, think a WWF advert, which could be a video, poster or article. Pick a major biome that isn't a rainforest or the tundra and create a fact file about that biome. If you did that for tropical rainforest, then perhaps choose a different task. And then the other task, pick one of the world's cold environments, not Svalbard, and create a fact file with the location, climate, plants and animals. Don't forget to upload your work to Teams.